Hi, welcome to Blogging Heads TV. This is Culturally Determined. I'm your host, Aryeh Cohen-Wade, and my guest today is Nicholas Clairmont. Nicholas, could you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi. Thanks for having me. I am an editor at Arc Digital. I am a freelance writer. I write around the place, including in Tablet Magazine. I'm working on a book. It's about the cultural ancestry and intellectual history of trolling. I am also a words columnist, doing sort of modern William Safire type thing. And yeah, that's it. Hi.
Thanks for coming out. Boy, I didn't know you were writing a book about trolling. That's more important part of our lives than we would have realized, 5 or 6 years ago. So I look forward to learning more about that. But we're going to be talking about a piece that you wrote that actually came out late last year in Tablet, and I guess it was linked in a Times op-ed recently, and that's how I found it. Missed it the first time, found it the second time. I thought it was pretty interesting. I wanted to talk to you about it. The Language of Privilege is the title, and we'll include a link to that piece on the Blogging Head site. What made you want to write this piece?
It actually started as I was trying to convince somebody in my life that, basically my perception that first of all, like, there's all this argument about whether wokeness is an appropriate word and whether wokeness exists and things like that. I prefer to kind of put that to the side, but wokeness isn't what it says on the tin, that there's something different inside than what it presents itself as, that it is a sham, that it is bad, and that it is parasitizing the left, and that if you're the person I was trying to convince is 5 years younger than I am, and I was just saying, hey, like, if you just remember, like, the Bush years, the commitments and energy and emotional experience of solidarity on not even like the far or American political left, but just like ordinary liberals, like, things were different, and there was less of an obsession with demographic group identity characteristics, and less of I would say, much more importantly, the morality and the moral force of the way people spoke about and did politics was less buzzword based, and there was less of a generating of new buzzwords that I just, as a matter of observation, quite apart from my own feelings about certain phrases, I just couldn't imagine normal people learning and using and adopting in like friendly conversation with one another, unless those normal people had been to grad school or worked out music like I did. And so ever since I noticed all these people around me kind of using these words that I just thought were fraudulent, they just didn't ring right to me, and also pretending not to be millionaires when they were. Their parents were millionaires and they were lying about it. And this contributed to my observation that this was a radical chic thing, to use Tom Wolfe's, great phrase, that a bunch of millionaires who were fundamentally, they had a class interest in preserving the status quo, and they were throwing up a shield, throwing up a dust to pretend that they were doing some sort of very transgressive thing, so some sort of very progressive thing, when in fact they were doing nothing at all. They were playing around with symbols and quite ugly polysyllabic words.
So something that I found interesting about the piece was that, okay, so we follow each other on Twitter, and from what I can sense of your politics, you're more on the right than the left, but you can correct me if I'm wrong about that.
I think my sense of myself is that you are wrong, but increasingly, I think it's more important to let other people classify you than...
Well, that plays with the theme we're talking about, like who gets to define, what words have meaning. But I would not consider you a socialist or a Marxist, but you kind of applied a Marxist, Marxian, or vulgar Marxist sort of analysis to this phenomenon of, language, and I found that interesting.
Yeah, what I'm trying to do is push people to be more class aware, even if I don't think that, you know Philippe L'Égalité?
I don't.
Okay, in the French Revolution, a aristocrat and I think even noble. I shouldn't bring up examples I don't know totally, but I think he may have actually been related to King Louis. Decided to go as far as possible on taking on the side of the revolutionaries, and they loved this. He took on the name Philippe L'Égalité in order to show his complete siding with them, and they guillotined.
Okay, so equality. He took on his last name, equality.
Yeah, it was one of the 3 revolutionary slogans, and I observed that if he got guillotined too, look, I grew up going to the fanciest private schools in Manhattan. I don't think it'll serve me well to let's say support the Marxist project of the global revolution of the proletariat, but I certainly think it is analytically useful to think like a Marxist at least some of the time, and in some ways it's one of the perspectives that I can apply as a thinker and writer. And in this case, I'm applying a sort of Marxist frame or like lens to wokeness, and I find that it has really no connection to anything material or meaningful about the sort of change that could occur in the world, other than rich people talk.
Right. So there's kind of a cui bono, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, who benefits aspects of the piece as well. If people who are using this kind of language or way of thinking, what is their ultimate goal? And you say, it's essentially, the children of the high bourgeoisie or something, people who went to good colleges and graduate schools, using confusing obscurantist language to sort of box out people who don't know how to use that language and maintain their own.
By the way, there's one thing I would amend, because I mentioned to you just before we recorded that I just reread the piece. And there's one thing that I would actually not stand by in the piece, which is that I gave the impression in one paragraph in the piece that I thought that like working class people are just so tired or just so otherwise, whatever, that they're unable to sort of master the language of wokeness. I don't think that's right. I mean, I think that they just, as a matter of the circumstances of ordinary people's lives, they would be unwilling. It just sounds stupid to them, and that they just don't happen to have gone to grad school where you learn about the intersection. Like they hadn't read Kimberly Crenshaw because it's not interesting and it doesn't add anything, and it's not how they joke, and it's not how, like I said in the piece, I don't prefer to speak in this way, not because I'm incapable of it, because I don't like it. And so I just wanted to amend that in the piece. I think I gave the impression that I think that this is a competence that some people have that other people can't achieve. And in fact, I think it's something that is just, some people just don't favor speaking in this way.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that makes sense. So one of the weird things about all of this stuff is there's sort of a bottom-up and top-down at the same time. So, as you note in the piece, I think it's understood that, like, the term woke itself was, like, black slang originally, and now it's, Fox News hosts are talking about it.
Yeah,
so
it's got more than 2 discrete phases of evolution, and there's fuzzy barriers to that, but yeah. Right,
and so a lot of American slang comes from Black Americans, and so that shouldn't be shocking. Like, I think, well, I'm just remembering something I read years ago, but like, there's a where the origin of the word cool comes from is contested, and there's one idea that like it comes from a pose that would be put on by like black men shortly after the end of slavery, and going back to roots from like West Africa and stuff. So yeah, so almost all slang, not almost all, a lot of American slang or just terms like bubbles up from Black America or other, other groups that are not in the elite. But then you also have sort of these technical terms that come from professoriate, like intersectionality, or BIPOC, BIPOC. I don't know if people even. I don't think I've ever heard someone actually say that. Do they say BIPOC, or do they say?
write it. Well, this is the thing. It's almost like
because people don't say POC, they say POC.
Right. Well, the thing is, I don't know. I mean, the thing like Arabic is very different written and spoken. Even French, for that matter, you kind of have to learn different grammar rules because it's insanely written. But Wokies, in as much as I'm kind of sticking with this metaphor that it's another language, it has very different rules of written and spoken grammar and syntax because people don't say BIPOC. That like. And also, I mean, people say the black and brown community, but I don't. Have you ever met a person who identifies as brown? Like, of course not. There
might honestly be some out there, but I mean, there is that old.
But it's not literal.
Well, there's that old sort of Sunday school thing about all the little children, that Jesus is black, brown, and yellow or something, that Jesus is gonna bring them in. So that goes back, and of course, there's like the Indians as the red man and the Chinese as the yellow man or something, but yeah, it's all a jumble. But yeah, so it is highly confusing that you're mixing these things and like, so how does this happen? 30 or 40 years ago, it was like, there were people hanging around and coming up with new terms or something and then just sort of spread out. And now with social media, of course, and things can jump around much more quickly and you see someone using a term and then anyone can start using it and it gets like normalized, to use another term that it sort of has different definitions than it would have 20 years ago, in different ways. And some of these are good and maybe more of them are stupid. And then there's like, did you follow Cheugy discourse? I
immediately decided not to follow it. I saw it. I didn't know how to say it. And I was like,
I might be saying it wrong. I think it's Cheugy. Cheugy, it's possibly Cheugy, I forget. There's a piece in the Times about this term that, like, it's rare that there's a slang term and there's, like, you can find one person who actually invented it. Seems like they actually did find this person who's, like, a 30-year-old woman who, like, made it up at summer camp when she was a teen and their friends started saying it too. It basically means not cool or, like, sort of, like, lame or out of date. And then I guess it's spread on TikTok.
I thought it was a positive.
No, it's bad.
Okay.
I think it's not totally bad. It's mixed because you could be like, oh, we were so chuggy back in the day or something like that. Again, I'm probably getting some of this wrong. But anyway.
I really ought to follow these, but this one I was just like, you know what? I've given myself like 3 weeks to see if this still exists. In general, I do a really bad job of like, I think I come off as so angry on social media, but which I think we all do. But I try to have, when there's like specifically a factual matter, if there's like a terrorist attack or something, I'm just going to wait 24 hours to see if the fact pattern as presented is still true in 24 hours. And with like word stuff, I think you got to give yourself 3 weeks to see, like, literally, is anyone still using this?
Right. Well, so I'm not on TikTok. I'm not like a 27-year-old girl, so I never heard this term before, and probably most other people who saw this Times article haven't, but immediately it was, like, people were like, this is so stupid, immediately, and we're like, the anti-Cheugy backlash, began as soon as people read this article, and then there's other, like, so there's the Times piece, as far as I know, that's the first mainstream piece about it, then there was something in the Telegraph, are you Cheugy? Are you anti-Cheugy? And so this sort of, like, think piece, like sphere of takes and stuff where people are like, the 5 clothing items you should wear if you don't want to be chuggy or something.
That's the British paper, right?
Yes, it's jumped the pond.
The way, like, by the way, this is I can't decide if I think it's awful or if it makes sense because there's a racism claim involved in it. But the new term for wokeness that is going around, at least in some places in England or in the United Kingdom, is Markleism, which I think is
after Meghan Markle.
Yeah, kind of fascinating because I don't know if they mean because she's black or if they mean because she exhibits, frankly, all of the classic tendencies of a woke person and that she makes a big show of her own victimhood on the television and talks about having self-diagnosed psychological problems that I don't actually believe and certain things like that.
I haven't seen that. That's interesting. It's too close to Marxism, I think, to take off. And yeah, obviously she's a very public figure at this point.
Press is willing to deal in levels of racism that makes me inherently suspicious of them. So I'm steering very clear of that, but it's just on my radar of terms I have seen and am interested in and would like to know more about their origin and how they're being used.
Right. Okay. So with Cheugy, which is doesn't no one knows how to pronounce it, but it just somehow because of technology and social media.
Like Cheugy?
I think it's Cheugy, but I could be wrong. But again, I haven't heard anyone say it.
No truth about this because it's a made-up term from someone's summer camp.
Exactly. And then hard G, soft G is we're talking about GIF or GIF is also a long-running internet dispute.
It's GIF. There's no.
I say GIF, but we're not going to settle that one here. That'd be a separate conversation. But yeah, just like okay, so a girl made this word up at summer camp. She and her friend said it. Strangely, it spread. It seemed so. There must be like sort of something to it. It like names some thing that people felt like they needed a word for, where the previous words weren't serving the purpose. And then because of social media, and because of, people who want to write articles about things that are happening online, suddenly everyone knows about Cheugy, and at least as far as I can tell, everyone being like the people I see on Twitter, is like sick of Cheugy instantly. And they're like, oh, Cheugy, like this is so fucking stupid Cheugy. And so, I don't know, like this is just one of these weird phenomenon, that pop up, and I guess we're all just like a little bit stupider for it. And then what, probably a year from now we'll be like, oh yeah, Cheugy, like, did we ever figure out how to pronounce that? And just like, and things like spin off. So I don't know where I'm going with all this, but I think it, like, when we're talking about specific terms, it certainly is the case that, social media makes it so that, something that a very small group was using a term, suddenly it's everywhere and people can fight about it.
And it's different. I mean, there's like that famous story, possibly apocryphal, that OMG comes from Winston Churchill. Like, it was like a telegram that he sent.
Yes, I think I've heard that one too.
Yeah. Showered on the Admiralty, I think. I think that it's important to know. It's not important to know. It can be interesting to know the origin of terms, but I guess there's like, this kind of like linguistic GMOs, and people are always saying, like, well, language evolves, so you can't object to any given term. And well, this is maybe again like a bad metaphor because I am not against GMOs in any way, but people have this intuition that like things evolve, and that you can also interfere with this in a way that makes things happen either kind of too fast, or there's some extrinsic process by which things happen that offends against the ordinary workings of things. And I guess I find that like if there's some like you ever see the really great old George Carlin bit where he describes the evolution from like shell shock to post-traumatic stress disorder?
I think I've heard that. If some podcast or something, I think excerpted that I listened to within the past month or so.
He had what, like, I think he experienced evolutions in language how I do, which is I just feel really defensive of language, and I'm willing to allow and admit changes, and I like all sorts of cool.
So you are a reactionary conservative, if you.
I guess. I mean, but no, I like new word. I love neologisms. By the way, the word neologism was coined by Thomas Jefferson. It's a really fun fact. Or maybe just the verb neologize. I don't know. Anyway, so I like new words. I try to drop new words into my column as much as possible. Sometimes I'll make some up on my own. I think that's really fun. It's when a term is sort of imposed specifically as a replacement for another one for the purposes of sort of ideological conformity, and also when the term is like voguish and polysyllabic and ugly, and it like specifically means now you have no way at all of mentioning some other thing because this is the term we use, and it conceptually excludes mentioning that. That bothers me, and so I guess I'm case by case reactionary.
Okay, yeah, I think probably most people, sometimes you see a word and you're like, what is this? And then maybe other times you think, oh, that's cool and interesting. I'm thinking like, so maybe the people who correct me if I'm wrong, the people who are in charge of like cleaning up and maintaining things in a public school, like, used to be called like a janitor, and then people didn't like that word came to be seen as negative, and then so people started saying custodian, which I guess must have had some previous meaning of like a legal custodian or something. But then at some point, like janitor and custodian sort of are synonyms, and whatever negative connotations we have about someone who has that job of like cleaning up children's vomit, the new word didn't change anything. And you can see this,
right?
So well-intentioned, but
just call them a janitor. It's fine. They know, and also I don't think there's anything undignified about that. And I bet that if you talk to most janitors, also there's this whole thing where this is just projecting. This is rich people projecting their own fears about losing social status, and the biggest actual stratification in America is between people who probably don't even have one friend who didn't go to college, and would process it psychologically. They would process it as a disaster if their child didn't get into college or decided not to go to college, and people who didn't go to college. That's the biggest actual social divide we have. And where do the types of terms that I dislike and am objecting to tend to be born, and where do they proliferate? Where do they gestate? In college. I mean, that's really what I'm talking about here. And I guess I don't. I just hate saying it this way because it seems so brash, but I just don't believe people when they tell me they don't see the phenomenon that I see. Here, I'm going to click to this thing that I wrote about this week. I'm quoting a New Yorker piece called "Is Mars Ours?" Wringing its hands over the potential unethical nature of our going to Mars as a species because often the way it's talked about is in terms of colonialism, using words like frontier and such, and that because of those words, this project is morally suspect. Now, of course, that's nuts. I mean, a normal person doesn't think like this because there's nobody on Mars to be unethical towards.
That we know of.
Well, I mean, sure.
Well, Elon isn't there yet. I mean, okay, I think it's,
Let me just read you this passage from the New Yorker,
sure,
right?
Go for it.
Okay. They're quoting a source, and they have to note all these things about what type of person she is, not just what she thinks and what she does in the world. So tracing her ancestry back to both Barbados and Eastern Europe, Prescott Weinstein is a queer, Black, Jewish, agender woman, and said that her second discipline has become, quote, Black feminist science, technology, and society studies. 2 years ago, she was a panelist at Decolonizing Mars, an unconference at the Library of Congress. Everyone, I don't have to actually convince anybody that that's weird. That's a weird way to talk, that this is a weird person, and that she's up to something that what I mean when I'm and I gesture at this.
Yeah, that's definitely different. I mean, yeah, so this goes back to sort of all these little sub-communities, or they in 30 or 40 years ago, they wouldn't have found each other, or maybe they had a zine, or, they met in the back of a bar once a week. And then fast forward to the 2010s, they're on Tumblr and talking about this stuff, and suddenly they're everywhere. So agender is not a word I would have been aware of in college, 15 years ago. But there were thousands or tens of thousands of people identifying this way online, and they found each other and started talking about it this way. I mean, so it's somewhere between should we take this seriously, or is this ridiculous? How, if someone says they're an agender woman, I don't know what that means. Do we need to respect this? And this gets into the pronoun stuff. I don't really want to get into that part.
It's just being nice and respectful towards people, just 'cause it's also just none of my business, except that she's in the New Yorker and at the Library of Congress having an unconference, and I'm sorry, but I reserve my right to point and laugh. And I'm going to point and laugh at an unconference about decolonizing Mars, a place where I have to stress again, there isn't anybody, and we have never been.
Well, I think it would be
and also that people who talk in like this, and again, I can't exactly define what I mean when I say like this, but I feel like everybody knows, and some people just lie and tell me they don't know what I mean, but they do. People like this also have taken over all the magazines I love and are mean to me. And that's just the honest way I can say it. It's mean the way that people behave towards one another who talk like this, and so I resent it. That is I'm just trying to be talk about the sort of pathos of what is going on here, because I feel that we've gotten into such fighting over the conceptual definitions of things.
Yeah.
And I have this very brilliant friend who whenever some fight over the the definition of wokeness comes up, he always brings up the really crappy old Jeff Foxworthy shtick, where that idiot comedian would say, if you knew a pickup truck with a gun rack, you might be a redneck. And he's like, dude, we know, if you have an LGBTQIA plus flag on your Raytheon float at the Pride Parade, you might be a woke neck, is his like bit, right? It's like you know what this tendency is. It's a cultural tendency. People are acculturated into it, and you've met people like this, and you know, and stop pretending you don't.
Okay, so here's the thing. I'm not sure I actually have met people like this. I think I've seen them online, but I was somewhat. So you talk about your cultural milieus and stuff, and so there's a part where you talk about your background, and I have this quote here. This is from the piece. Because I live in Brooklyn, work in journalism, went to private school at a reasonably fancy college, and I'm friends primarily with workers in the, quote, information economy. I can speak fluent wokeese. I usually don't speak it, but I can. I don't like it. I think it sounds bad. And I choose to use English most of the time, but I know perfectly well how to sound if I want to be a consultant, or if I need to go to grad school, or if I am in an interview for really any job that pays upward of 6 figures and is based in the city.
It's a millionaire thing. Again, all I'm trying to impress upon people is this isn't like a project that's an intellectual movement of Black radical activists. This is a millionaire, rich white person thing that over-indexes for grad students.
I think the grad school aspect is
to it. They are not being hostile to Black people. They're being hostile to the landed white upper class, to the aristo and bourgeois classes, as Marx would define them.
Right. So what interested me was thinking like. Despite the fact that we're talking to each other and follow each other on Twitter, so just I went to public school K through 12, a fancy college, do work in the information economy, kind of, still live in Brooklyn, but I don't know if I've ever actually met anyone who certainly says words like this in real life. I see them online.
It's like I spent a lot of time. I went to college in Ireland where there was a whole. I thought it would be a really easy cultural transition because I'm like, they're right across the ocean and they speak English, and my great grandparents are Irish. Maybe this will be fine. And I had to find that like I was offending against some cultural norm when I used the phrase British Isles, which is something that I've been kind of freaked out about for 10 years now because they insisted I call it like the Hibernian Archipelago or some circumlocution.
Okay, so that does that demonstrate that sort of every group has their own little things that they particularly care about?
Since that happened, which would have been in like 2011, what's interesting is that Ireland has been more or less taken over by not its own, it didn't retain its own upper class discourse norms. It's been taken over by our upper class discourse norms and now retains basically the taboos of American wokeness, and is talking about like structural racism and post-colonialism. And I'm like, no, guys, you're a former colony. Have you forgotten about your revolution that was like just 100 years ago? What are you doing?
You mean in the sense of that the white people in Ireland are like beating their own breasts about colonialism? I actually just saw a tweet that some Irish politician, was aligning themselves with the, Palestinian movement because they were similarly colonized by, the British and so forth.
That's a staple feature of Irish politics, but they, for example, will. It's kind of hard to explain because they've gone through such intense social change so quickly, mostly because of the kind of relaxation of the power of the church. But how do I want to characterize this? I don't want to say anything stupid about Ireland because I haven't been there for 4 years.
Okay.
And I'm very worried about it right now. But I guess the point is like I think a country that is a small revolutionary republic that has ethnic right of return laws should not be thinking about itself in terms of like American immigration fights.
Mm-hmm. So this would be a social media thing because they speak English primarily in Ireland, and so they get our social media. Is that the explanation? They get our TV?
It's definitely that, and our TV. I mean, we have enormous cultural soft power, and our politics is taking over everything more so than it already had. And during the Trump years, things were very intense and still are. And so I think that as far as the politics of immigration restrictionism were an enormous cultural flashpoint that was discussed in ways that were, I thought, important, also somewhat dishonest. That people were trying to enforce views on one another that I don't know, people were misrepresenting each other's words, basically. I thought that it was odd to see that come up in Ireland, where I was like, you understand that you guys have the immigration policy that Donald Trump wants. You can't try to like take the moral high ground from the left on America. It doesn't make sense. That's just the sort of thing that like there's just a lot of internal. We talk around a lot of like internal policy and political inconsistencies with just buzzwords and made up phrases that don't make sense.
Right. Okay. So, well, okay, well, let me just shift slightly. So, there's the excerpt that you read from that New York article, that's the way of taking it seriously. But then it seems to me there's as much or more of people online who just say these things knowing that it's a joke. And like a lot of terms and, that like holding space or something. Like I hear people using that in just a total mocking way. And these are like, lefty Brooklyn types. Like I'm thinking of one podcast in particular, where anytime they'll say something about this, using sort of SJW or woke speak, it's always in an arch tone, and they're like making fun of it at the same time that they're talking about it. So one of your, you talk about how, if you want to speak wokies, you need to talk about like bodies and spaces and platforms and stuff. And remind me of this tweet from 2017. This is one of those weird Twitter accounts, if we can still say that's a coherent group, Juice Maine, and this is a famous tweet, in certain circles, so it says, Pitchfork, King Pussy Eater revolutionizes our perception of bodies and spaces with his hit single, Goop on Ya Grinch, 7.6. So it's, reading that, it's somewhat hard to understand what the joke is, but it's making fun of the kind of headline that Pitchfork, the online hipster, music review site, would have done at some point, and that there'd be a rapper or something, King Pussy Eater, the S's are dollar signs, and that his, goop on your Grinch, whatever that means, if that's just total nonsense, just a funny phrase. And so this guy was making fun of this. This was from 2017, 4 years ago. He's already talking about bodies and spaces. He's showing that this is kind of stupid to begin with. And I'm sure this guy is probably like, dirtbag left or something, he probably is a Bernie fan. If I can place his politics, but so there's as much, people are talking this way, but there's other people who are just like totally mocking this in a good natured way, not like saying, like the Sean Hannity way or something, but
angry. But I mean, so one of the things that I talk about in the piece, and I this is where I actually think the piece was maybe the most successful, is the relationship between like the actual, because conservatives will just use the phrase the left to mean anyone to the left of me, and then the actual left will use they'll use the phrase liberals and the left like interchangeably because it's functionally interchangeable for them, whereas the actual left, as in socialists who are skeptical and revolutionary, will like use the word liberal also with that sour tart connotation because these are people who are to their right. And I think that this causes no end of talking past each other. But generally speaking, my understanding is that, this is why the World Socialist website has done the most aggressive disputing of the 1619 Project, right? In like a hilarious handshake of power, epic handshake, whatever that meme is called, with like Donald Trump's extremely incompetent and insane attack on it. And so like, I think that I tried to characterize in the article the way that woke people see themselves as being like all the way out on the left and revolutionary, whereas the actual left, the people who are meaningfully rather than merely symbolically pushing for leftist politics to take over, think what I think, which is that it's a scam, it's a parasite, and it's bogus, and it should be recognized as such. And it's also very obvious that it is. So this creates very strange alliances and bedfellows where the right and the farthest parts of the left are like, yeah, what are you doing here? And as I mentioned in the piece, Adolph Reed has been an interesting figure in this regard.
And Matt Bruning wrote a piece. Freddie DeBoer would be another person. I mean, basically, maybe you could put the Trap House Red Scare people there too, and
what is Vogue? Vogue is a magazine for selling. It's explicitly a magazine about luxury culture. So luxury consumer culture, and then the presence of Teen Vogue, which is what I would describe as a very woke publication, is nuts. It's it's like it's the example to me of like, oh, like this shouldn't have happened. I don't know how this happened, but I'm going to try to explain to myself and to others, how did this happen? Why did this happen? And I am not going to side with this, but just because it thinks of itself as on the left I'm not going to locate my own politics around this. And if other people want to see me as being reactionary or right wing because I react against and dislike whatever the hell it is that is going on at Teen Vogue, like, that's all right. I don't really care what words people use to classify me. I just think that things that are going on there are very silly. I don't think
right, but I mean, there's Teen Vogue. I don't entirely understand it either, and they had this controversy. Talked about it in my previous episode with Ben Burgess about a new editor being kicked out the door because of old offensive tweets. But I mean, so they seem to be, but they're not just on the woke train. Like, they have articles about like Marxism, and stuff. So I don't know. I don't pay enough attention to them.
As I say in my piece, woke people speak specifically, affectionately about socialism and Marxism, but they are not radical. They are not revolutionary. They merely think they are. And so I describe in the piece an exchange between Wes Yang and somebody at Market Watch, a site that is ridiculously, again, it's comic. Like the website Market Watch, which if you click onto it is like covered in stock tickers because it's for stock people doing stock things, is like tweeting out like revolutionary communist agitprop, and you're like, I'm sorry, I don't believe you, Market Watch, that you want a Marxist revolution. I don't think that's right. I think that you might be lying to me. Why do I think that? Because there's the stock ticker for like the Dow. What are you talking about?
Okay, so is this a like a kind of false consciousness, like in a weird reverse way from what, classical Marxists would say? Is it do they actually know that this is all put on? Are they fooling themselves? How do you, in your interpretation, what's going on?
First of all, like I'm wary of, I think it's always good kind of psychological advice to just say out loud, like, if you're characterizing somebody else's intent and private mind, like, you don't know. So I don't know. But my understanding and guess is that there is a division between people who are doing it completely cynically and true believers. I think that the younger in their 20s somebody is currently, we are now speaking in 2021, the likelier they are to have been educated and acculturated, such that they actually have never seen, like, they don't remember the Bush years. They don't remember what it was like for it to be kind of unmentionable to say, like, I think everyone should be allowed to smoke weed on the street and gay people should be able to get married and like make out on television shows. So like the idea that most of the cultural repression and like that in as much as there was low social trust, you could express your social trust only with people about things that, like, just in other words, that the right was more culturally dominant than it is today. And so a lot of this comes from the assumption of left-wing cultural dominance that people, again, lie about. They're like, I don't know what left-wing cultural dominance. I'm like, come on, like Coca-Cola is making ads for you personally, like as specifically attuned for your preferences. You should, and your left wing, you should understand. But again, when I say left wing, it's important to recognize the distinction between center-left liberals and the actual left, and then everyone who's right-wing. I mean, these are not complex distinctions for people to maintain, and yet they seem to fail at it all the time. I am myself, I think, on the center-left, but I'm not like, I can't be like the suasion of like a Coca-Cola ad saying like, and we're doing like such great inclusion, like vote for the person who looks like America. Like these phrases that are just totally meaningless. It just doesn't work on me. I don't know why people like it so much. I find it unappealing. And so I guess it just seems to me that, again, if you just don't like dishonesty, you should note that these are phrases that are pro-dishonesty and anti-intellectual, and try to just analyze things in terms of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not an original point at this point to say if Coca-Cola is saying it, then it doesn't really challenge the underpinnings of contemporary society, because Coca-Cola sells sugar water, by the billions every day, and that's not, doesn't really have our best interest in heart, I think, although, of course, I love Coca-Cola. It's, it's the real thing. Or was that Pepsi the real thing? I can't remember now. Okay, so...
Right, but it's also, as I also mentioned in the piece, like, I'm also open to the right-wing analysis where it's like the reason that Raytheon and Coca-Cola are so successful is because they, as you say, like, make good stuff. They're good at bombs and they're good at sugar water, and that's like also why they succeed. And they're, by the way, they're also good at advertising to people and giving them what they want to hear. Like,
the genius, well-paid consultants and advertisers and so forth who are trying to figure out how to sell their sugar water to the American people have decided at this point that one way to do it is to, protest against the Georgia voting law by, saying that the Major League Baseball shouldn't have their All-Star game in Atlanta or whatever. Okay, like, so that's their calculation, and it's certainly true that young people, it's the type of people who advertisers want to influence are young people, because older people have like set consumer patterns, and if they're in their 50s and drinking Pepsi, that's not going to change. They want to get like teenagers and so forth. And so a lot of marketing is targeted at, people under 25, even though, maybe they're like 15% of the population or something. And so that calculation is that, embracing this stuff is the way to keep on selling stuff. And, during Black Lives Matter, almost every corporation put out some sort of like, we stand with this movement statement, including laughable ones. Like, I think Gushers was the one that was funniest. The like gelatin treat that I enjoyed as a child. So Gushers stands with the Black Lives Matter movement. So if Gushers is there, then
I got and ate some Gushers because I was reminded they existed because of that. So
I remember them being strangely good, but I haven't had one in probably about 3 decades.
They're fantastic. I will advertise for you.
Okay, so at one point, you could say, okay, at the point where Gushers and whatever corporate entity owns Gushers is on the bandwagon, then like they've won. But at the same time, like, they've won what? If like this is all sort of in the realm of symbolic politics, and what has actually changed here?
Here's the problem. I think that the problem with that formulation is like, it's not, they didn't win. All they won was Gushers ads. They didn't like it. Let me put it another way. Let's say that you were the sort of person who actually wished for liberatory movements for historically oppressed and marginalized peoples to succeed. This is actually not a hypothetical for me. I am such a person. You would want them to win victories that were not merely cosmetic. You would want them to win substantial victories. And my problem, this is when I say this is a parasite on the project of whether you want to call it the left or I would just say like good people who think right and aren't nuts. Like, everyone wants actual justice, and when you capitalize that J and put a social before it, like, you start screwing things up really bad, because people all think we're human, we're a social species, and people think in a very conventional way, and the things that they start thinking are just like not right, and so they start thinking that they have won when they've won like the wrong thing, and they totally have taken their eye off the ball. So like, to me, it's like they're like, I don't know, maybe this metaphor doesn't make sense, but it's like a baseball game where like they've won the thing where like who can get the fans to do the better wave, but like meanwhile the other team is just like hitting like home run after home run, and like the scoreboard is like just totally asymmetrical, but the team that's losing is like, yes we did it, look how good the fans are clapping and waving, and you're like, what? Do you understand what the actual game being played here is? Do you know what the hell is going on? You literally aren't looking at the ball.
Okay, so so this is sort of a,
or stupid words are the fan.
Wokeism is the opiate of the young people or something would be one way to maybe put this, that
yes, I mean, I think that
people are being fooled and things continue on. Like, so your piece was written months before the
Christopher Hitchens with reservations, and I would be remiss as a Hitch acolyte to not point out that phrase is constantly misconstrued when when Marx said religion is the opiate of the masses, he was speaking positively of religion. Side of oppressed people. He continued. If you read the full paragraph, he was
because opiates had a more positive valence in the 1840s, or
he meant it was like a painkiller. It helps. It's just a pedantic point I need to make.
No, that's interesting. But okay, so your piece was written months before this online ad came out from the CIA. I talked about this in the Burgess episode. In some way, your piece anticipates this. You talk about Raytheon. This is the company, or not company, the organization or whatever that buys the missiles that Raytheon manufactures to launch via drone into the Middle East. So sort of the reaction to that, doesn't that show that everyone I saw was laughing at this and mad about it one way or another?
This is where Twitter really isn't real life. I mean, look, I think that a recruitment video is aimed at primarily 18 to 22-year-olds. And one of the things I was going to say to you earlier, because I was surprised to hear you say, again, I only know you from Twitter, but that you don't really know a bunch of people who are sort of sincerely and really woke. It tends to me to be people who are a little online and take their politics very much from just sort of the culture around them as they perceive it, but they don't perceive it necessarily very piercingly. And where I would go to if I were to get in the car and go pick you up and be let's go find some wokesters, I would take you to Yale, where I spent a bunch of time in college. And
that's in case anyone didn't know, that is the college that I attended as a young person.
Okay. So I didn't go there, but I spent a lot of time there in college, and that's definitely where I encountered the most people who sincerely believed and used a bunch of the words that later I found kind of infecting a bunch of, the reason I don't read The New Republic anymore is because it's full of the sort of people that I met at Yale.
And this was circa 2010?
Yeah, 2010 to 2014 or so. And Brown or Princeton or
these are the Ivy League schools. Okay.
And whether the kid is there because their parents are millionaires, or whether they got their way there without having millionaire parents, their expected lifetime earning is very likely to be millions higher than somebody who didn't go to an Ivy League school. Or I would take you to, people are making fun of Barry Weiss on Twitter for focusing on these ridiculous, the Dalton type, Harvard West, whatever, fancy schools. But that's another place that if you wanted to find actually existing sincere wokeness, I could take you right now to Manhattan, to my old prep school, and you'd find it.
Okay. Yeah. I these people definitely exist, and maybe more of them are online than in real life. Probably you would agree with that. But I mean, so personally, I did I graduated from Yale in 2005, and then I lived in Western New York for a dozen years with sort of the normies, more or less. And so, I would see, I would see things online, but it didn't filter down because, there's places that are culturally behind the
majority movement. It uses, this is again through the abusive language, it uses bullying tactics where I am told by New York Times writers periodically that I am a racist because I use the term woke, and that term, quote, I hear it with a hard R, which is another thing that I mentioned in the piece, that as though I am using the N-word by using this word that, I mean, there's still get woke and stay woke graffiti all over my neighborhood. I live in Bushwick, because it's now like seeing hieroglyphs in a pyramid or something, but because it's 3 years ago, that was the cool thing to say. And now it's of course only used pejoratively because, I don't know, things evolve. And
yeah, I think it is unfortunate that woke ended up being the catch-all term for all this stuff. It used to be SJW, and then
nastier and more abusive, which is why long ago I wrote a piece saying, look, I don't really like this phrase. I don't like a lot of, snowflake is another one that I actually kind of liked the way that the metaphor works, because it's saying you think you're kind of infinitely special and unique and deserve careful handling, but you kind of melt when touched. Like, I think that's a good work. It worked as a joke, but the people, I just started to notice, like, oh, like that creep from Fox News is using it. I don't want to be affiliated with that. So
yeah, I think so. I had Robbie Soave on this show about 3 years ago. He wrote a book called Panic Attack, and he's actually he was one of the people who sort of brought the term cancel culture somewhat into wider use. And then he's actually, I don't know whether you're serious or joking, but he's like done a number of tweets over the past couple months saying, like, I apologize for bringing this, because like anyone who anything bad happens to them, they're like, I'm being cancel cultured, and It's gotten out of control.
Trump's weird, like, I don't know what he's doing now. Instead of tweeting, he releases these, like,
he has a blog, basically.
Whatever. He's a Tumblr teen now, but like he said that the Preakness thing where the horse was doping was cancel culture, and I was just like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, the horse was canceled.
Even for you.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting that I think this is the first time we've mentioned former President Donald J. Trump in this conversation. That is something that can't be ignored. Like, he has dominated our consciousnesses from July 2015 until he was kicked off Twitter. And his malign personality has warped everything else in America and the world and inside our brains during that time. So, I mean, and there's it's like if Trump hadn't won, if Trump had never been born, it's just hard to see, like, how would this have worked out if, Ted Cruz had become president, if Hillary Clinton had become president. It's hard to know. It's impossible to know, I guess. But, I mean, Snowflake is funny because, like, who is the biggest snowflake in the world? It's Donald J. Trump.
By the way, like I mentioned earlier, and we don't have to get into this at length, but like I'm writing about trolling, and it's so hard to write about because he fits so much of the model. But then one of the things that most trolls, whether today online or I'm writing really mostly about historical things from before the word was coined, but that I think fit the model, and he, like most trolls, are really impervious to being trolled themselves. Is actually a huge part of it, is this sort of like studied detachment. And like, he's not. You can get that guy to just start screaming about like any subject you're just a little bit insulting about if you can communicate with him at all.
Yeah, he's very easy to rile up.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I don't, the historians and cultural historians, if they still exist in 1,500 years, will be looking back on this and trying to figure out what was the interaction between this and the fact that, so much of this language grew on social media, and then Trump used social media to power his rise and used it in a way no American politician ever had before. Like, it's all part of it. And it's just like, there's so many weird things that social media introduced that that never would have been possible before, and then became sort of like normalized. Like, Trump would tweet something, and then 1,000 people would say, "Eat shit."
Phrase, but like, because it implies that we could, through kind of collective action or force of will, like make it continue to feel abnormal. Like, it refers to the emotional experience of how something feels, normal or abnormal, not just to whether something actually is like numerically common or usual. And I just have always thought that it's some sort of linguistic social engineering that people are referring to when they say, like, don't normalize this.
Well, and then there was a very common thing people would say online about things that happened during the Trump administration was, this is not normal. But, like, if it's happening repeatedly, then I guess it is sort of normal.
Right.
And, like, if the president is saying it, the president is sort of like, in the American cultural conception, the, father deity of all of our lives, like, it became normal. And so, tweeting at the president, sending out all caps statements at 1 a.m. became normal because that's what was happening. But,
look, in college I studied philosophy. I don't have anything but like a, undergrad and I guess master's-y thing. But like the way that we were trained to think when we were writing an essay about some, I don't know, dispute in the history of philosophy or whatever, was to distinguish between disputes that were merely verbal, is the going phrase, and disputes that are substantive. And I thought that Trump was a real master of getting people to have merely verbal disputes with him and freak out about stuff that I was very freaked out about his presence and his holding power. But I thought a judicious and wise person who wished to oppose him, I won't say resist, would would actually hold their fire on the things that they didn't need to bother with. And this is, I think, of a piece. If you want to really kind of begin to dig through and analyze like what happened there, I think a big part of like I experienced Trump's rise, and particularly his campaign for 2016, as, among other things, just like a horrific attack on the English language, and which I'm just really sensitive about. And then and then when his opponents started to, I felt, kind of pick up the abusive language back at him in order to fight things that he was doing. And then everything became like, okay, there's some dispute at the border, like, is everything but open borders, like fascist immigration restrictionism, is the type of dispute that I find completely distracting and foolish to have. And I recall like Angela Nagel getting some version of what might be classified as canceled because she pointed out that for his entire career, Bernie Sanders has been not the biggest friend of open borders. It's these sorts of what I consider merely verbal disputes. If your dispute can be settled by the dictionary and not by, facts, like that you're having the sort of dispute that like people who want meaningful substantive change and wants to agree about things that they actually agree about and disagree about things they actually disagree about, and not fucking tweet, just put it all aside if you care. And it seems to me that people who don't have to care and are very privileged, to use the parlance, are running stuff because they have distracted us with merely verbal, foolish, substanceless, crazy, and very boring debates.
So two things that two great polarizing forces of our times are social media and Donald Trump. And the way to succeed on social media is to have a very sort of black and white, moralistic, highly emotionally charged statement, and then you get 1,000 retweets. And Trump was good at that, but also, because Trump was so outrageous and awful, he polarized something so that, immigration used to be sort of like a cross-cutting issue where, George W. Bush tried comprehensive immigration reform. Then there were people in the Democratic Party who were not on board with that. And, Trump has made it so that, like, the red team, blue team, it's, everyone is polarized. So both of those things are bad. And, I tried to tweet this once, and I think I didn't state it well, and I don't have it fully formed in my head, and maybe it's sort of doesn't make any sense to begin with, but, like, a lot of the disputes, like you say, on social media, turn on word use, a specific term, someone saying the wrong word, and, social media is, despite Twitter having, like, the ability to record a little audio file of yourself, it's people typing out words. And so in this universe, this, like, closed universe in which words are the things that matter, disputes about words and word usage are more important than in the real world, where, like, someone getting punched in the face or shot is a big problem, not the specific word they use. Of course, so you're the philosopher. We can't, like, mediate reality without language. Maybe, I don't know. But in this world, it's like semantic disputes, whether to use POC, BIPOC, whether the word black should be capitalized or not. Like these attain totemic power when they don't have a material effect in the real world as much as people think they do.
I think that's right. I mean, so, like, to steal a formulation from Jane Coaston, I think that we give entirely too much. With, like, words matter more than people think, and also less. Like, these two things can be true at the same time because they're in different ways. Like, people give too much, they invest too much symbolic significance and just, like, energy in word fights. But also, like, words are very, very important because they're the only thing we have to communicate concepts to one another, and concepts matter, and like the things we do because people communicate one thing rather than another thing matters.
Yeah, without words, I mean, I guess we have symbols, but
they're very beautiful. Like I really like reading words. It's just that is
one of my favorite things to read are words. I would say, like, it's top three at least.
Yes, top four. So like, it just seems to me that the development of new kind of like arcane sounding ridiculous euphemisms should not be processed and recognized as like a moral achievement, and yet people who have dedicated themselves towards moral achievement for their political side, in particular on the left, and I mean, people always object to, like, I'm totally comfortable acknowledging like the right does silly PC type stuff too. I'm very uninterested in the debate over who does it more. I'm focused on the left thing because it's newer and novelty attracts people's interest. But like, I think we should just like cool it with focusing on exactly which words people use and focus more on what people mean. And if we pay close attention, we can almost always discern what people mean and be like good at reading and listening to people. Just like be cool. You don't have to be generous and people mean something smarter than they actually do, but like don't think that people mean something more objectionable and stupid than they actually do.
Right. So yeah, be cool to each other.
Be well, just be good at it. Like,
I mean, the problem is that, like misreading someone in a negative light, whether on purpose or without meaning to, is a way to go viral or to attract attention to oneself, or
it's invirtuous. And I think that we should just like start enforcing as more of a cultural norm, like people will hate you and shame you for that. That's bad. Like I'm generally against social shame. I think we picked it up. We have enforced a horrible shame culture and it's getting worse and worse. On the other hand, like we should shame misreading. Well,
I mean, the problem is that, we elected the least virtuous person in America to be president. And so, we obviously Americans don't agree on what the virtues are and who embodies them. So we have a way to go there.
I think that wasn't like an accident. Like he was elected specifically because he was the least virtuous person in America and everyone recognized it.
Well, it's hard to say. This is, I guess, the mirror image of, are people like fooling themselves or cynical or what? Like, there's people who think there's the QAnon people, the crazy part where Trump is fighting on behalf of the like children who are being like raped and eaten. But then there's just like the people who, like, oh yeah, Trump, he's a good Christian man, and like he loves his family, and
sorry,
like, do they believe that or not? It seems laughable, but
I think that they're, at the very least, they're compelled into believing that by fear, right? Like there was this whole thing right around when Trump was elected first, the joke that was like the emotions that everyone would talk about were hate and fear. We said it like over and over again. I remember this being in every op-ed, like, hate and what are we going to do about the culture of hate and fear in America that got Donald Trump elected? And I remember thinking, like, I'm not sure those are the relevant emotions. I think fear is right, but like, I think it's self-pity and fear. Like, people feel bad for themselves and they feel beset by other people and put upon. They don't feel hate towards others. They feel like others have it over on them and that like something is unfair.
Yeah, well, self-pity, I think, is definitely...
Bad things happen to them. It's like, I'm worried they're going to do bad things to me. And then you get to, I hope bad things happen to them because you want, your contenders to be disempowered. But like, that's a very different kind of emotional experience. And it's not very different, but it's subtly different, but it's important.
I think self-pity is very important part of the Trump persona, and the people who felt like they were victims who saw him as, their champion. I've made this joke before, the Trump's real, epitaph should be, they treated me very unfairly, because strangely, his persona is winning, but really his real persona is like, they cheated me, I'm the real victim here. And so that resonates, and you could say there's who is the victimizer? Well, maybe it's capitalism, maybe it's the deep state, maybe it's the Zionist entity, but Trump was able to channel those feelings of, I've been betrayed, I've been mistreated, and say that he's the one who's fighting against it. And one odd thing about how the Trump years played out was that it seemed initially the who he was saying was cheating you were people crossing the Mexican border illegally and taking your jobs, Muslims who are like performing acts of terror on the homeland and in the Middle East, and then sort of the amorphous like deep state or liberals or something, but really. And so there was, I think, a lot of fear early on, and the travel ban being one of the first things that the administration did reinforce this, that, like, there was going to be this sort of real, like, clash and violence against specific groups. But really, that sort of faded away, and it just became the media. Because Trump is, like, this media creation, and he watches TV all the time. And so, like, the media, deep state, that became, like, the Democrats, that just became the big enemy. And that's and the failing New York Times and the lying media and MSDNC and so forth became became the villains, and there weren't like pogroms against Arabs or Mexicans in America.
I can't remember which right-wing pundit I was listening to on a podcast said that like an important, it just as a matter of political strategy, it's important to understand that like the American political right hates the media more than they hate Democrats, and that just if you want to win, you just got to know that. And like to the degree that I process the Trump years as being surprisingly better than I feared,
except for that one, the one big exception.
I was at like total DEFCON 1 like during the campaign. I was at like he specifically when we talked about the deportation force, like immigration is my top political concern in the sense that I am very pro-immigration. It's like just as far as I rank issues, like that's my thing. I want more immigration. So like. I was very unhappy with him talking about creating a deportation force to go into the interior of the country and like tear people away. I was like, oh,
yeah, and some of that did happen, but it didn't amount to as much, and the wall did not get fully built. And
best as possible with ourselves, like what was projected and predicted, what we were picturing in our minds is not what happened. There are things that happened that could be squared with the phrasing that we can pretend as though like the you know what I mean? Like that, what I thought would happen or could potentially in a worst case scenario happen that was like worst plausible scenario happen, like did not happen. So just like personally being honest about my own. Yeah. So, I thought it would be Hitler and it was Berlusconi is like, so, and like, I hate Berlusconi, I hate Trump, but like, it wasn't Hitler. So, I guess I don't know. I think, it just seems to me that people tried to sustain the don't normalize this thing was trying to sustain the sense that this was Hitler and that was dishonest in some way. And I had to break with myself I feel I have a responsibility to be honest with myself. And also as a writer, I got to be honest with people who read me. And I had to say, I got this a little wrong.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, Trump obviously wasn't Hitler. Hitler was a lot smarter and more capable than Trump. And Hitler actually believed in things. Trump only believes in himself. I'm repeating myself for various previous episodes. But, one of the things, a project that I was working on with Bob Wright, the founder of Blogging Heads, was called the Mindful Resistance Project. And we had a newsletter and tried to do some other stuff of basically, what is, using ideas from, like mindfulness meditation and evolutionary psychology, other things Bob is interested in. What was the most effective way to oppose Trump and that project sort of it petered out, I guess you could say, but it definitely was a lot of nonsense that was happening. And, Trump is a farcical figure, and it was hard to figure out what, and on any given day he would say something or do something insane, and then it was hard to know in the moment whether this was just, nonsense or actually was dangerous or had a lasting effect. And then there wasn't enough time to reflect because he would say or do something crazy 36 hours later. And then, he responded very poorly to the coronavirus pandemic. But previous to that, like the economy was sort of humming along, and there Muslims were not rounded up in camp. So it didn't seem like it was, and there was no nuclear war. So it didn't seem as bad as the prediction. But then all of the Trump crises were self-inflicted in the first 3 years, and then there was finally an actual external threat, and he totally botched it and fucked it up, and hundreds of thousands of extra people died. And I would mostly blame that on Trump, although lots of other countries have screwed up this crisis as well.
For me, yeah, I mean, I can see the evidence for that in all sorts of like points where he did something other than what I would wish him to do, especially he like believed Xi Jinping at moments on the telephone, that like against his own advisors. I think the CDC made a bunch of bad decisions, that he was ultimately the head of, all federal agencies. On the other hand, the strong evidence for that claim to me would have to be similar countries to the United States had very, very different deaths per capita. And I don't see it. I mean, it just doesn't seem in evidence to me. Like we can look at the exact details of how the course of the pandemic, I really want to train myself not to say is playing out. And it just doesn't seem to me that there was some actually existing alternative like course that it could have taken.
I think that, if you had I actually tweeted this, I went back and looked it up. I tweeted this the day before the day of, the date that the NBA canceled their season. It seemed like the crisis was finally here. Said if Trump cared about anything aside from himself, he would resign and let Mike Pence handle this crisis because he can't handle it.
He do that, right? Like there was a degree to which that's exactly like he didn't resign, but he did. Basically, he was like, I just want to yell like. Well,
he was checked out, but the fact that it was revealed how much power the executive has in our system during a crisis, and if he had been, Mike Pence, a conventional politician, if he had been like actually running things, it would have been better. Pretty much any, if you'd taken anyone off the street, been running things, it would have been better. But okay, we've gone far afield from our original topic, and that's fine.
One thing that you said that I thought was interesting to go to like the words thing that I'm always on, and I try to get at really important things with words and not just be a pedant, but that's, I guess, again, for others to decide if I'm succeeding at. But in as much as you've mentioned being in some project that used the word resistance, I really hated that. As I said early on, I was on board with the Trump-Hitler comparison thing, but I balk now at the huge proliferation of things implicitly comparing the situation of America under Trump to the situation of Germans under Hitler, which is where that term comes from, and I didn't like people comparing themselves to Sophie Scholl and to the French resistance or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, the term bubbled up from online, I assume, and the two parallels were the French resistance and the Star Wars resistance, and because there's another theme I've harped on the past couple of years, like American life becoming cosplay, and people sort of there was also a lot of talk about the stuff that happens in Harry Potter when the evil Slytherin people take over the Ministry of Magic, and then like there's this outside group, Dumbledore's Army, I think it's called. Like that was sort of another thing that was being bandied about early on of we all need to get together to fight against. So yeah.
The nonsense.
Claiming the term resistance certainly made one seem like a more important actor in a giant, global galactic drama than was actually happening, because most of those people were like just tweeting or something. But then there was plenty of people who were like organizing on the ground and knocking on doors and like.
Even that people weren't taking action outside of their own homes, it's so much as that. The real resistance, well, they were killed, a lot of them. It just seemed to me to be a comparison that people who exhibit physical courage there's a special valor that we should and do often reserve for them. And there's a difference between physical and other courage, and people who put their bodies on the line for torture and death and persecution by the government and being jailed and things are different. They really are different, and we should just maintain that distinction in the language so that we have such a distinction for those people. That, typically speaking, whatever name we give to people like that should be given by other people to them and not to them by themselves. And so that's that whole thing just kind of bummed me out, I guess.
Right, but I mean, who are the people who are putting their bodies on the line over the past year or so? Like you have Antifa and you have the people storming the Capitol, but these were all like, it's postmodern because it was like this cosplay shit, like combined with, so it was like a LARP, live action role play, people putting on costumes and going and acting out sort of fiction, but in real life, and so and both of those things kind of like the fantasy is that an individual person can physically resist the state in any actual way. That's nonsense because the state has tanks and missiles and so forth, and so they're always going to win in the end.
No, because that also presumes. I mean, this is what's going on right now with the sort of do we figure out whether there's extremism in the ranks of the military. In a revolution, presumably some faction of the military would take their tanks and join the rising up people or whatever. But I think you put your finger there on what bothered me so much about the framing of the sort of like ordinary, normal, only mildly politically engaged Democrats, like as opposing Trump in any kind of useful way, which is that. Or in a really big way, like not just like in the normal course of politics, like they opposed the last Republican president, which is to say, in terms of LARPing and fantasy, there does become this thrill, and there is a sense in which they sort of wish it to be true, and the incentives flip, and it starts to be the case that if you're a Keith Olbermann loving, resistance hashtagging, Facebook group joining liberal who's enjoying, you start to enjoy the Trump years in a way that I detected, and I know it's a kind of a nasty charge to make against.
Oh no, I think
I didn't like that.
Yeah,
I
didn't
enjoy them at all. I hated it. I wanted it to be over, and I was glad when Biden won the primary because it was my assessment that he was the one who was most likely to actually win. And I thought it was the people who were most likely to write hashtag resistance who forced him to have a vice presidential candidate who I thought was not strategically wise. And there's just a bunch of things that happened that I thought these people have different incentives than I do here. They are enjoying this.
Yes, so I think there's both people who are sort of like, I mean, resistance grifter was the term for people like the Krasenstein brothers and other, Jeff Tiedrick and Brooklyn Dad Defiant, and these other sort of Twitter personalities that seem to be, sort of just riding this wave. But then, like, what that movie that came out right after World War II called, like, The Best Years of Their Lives, or Best Years of Our Lives, is like, if you feel like you're participating in this great moral drama, afterwards, the return to normal life seems like a letdown. And Biden was promising return to normalcy. We haven't quite gotten there yet, but yeah, and the way political Twitter plays out is like every day there's some sort of grand fight going on, and people feel like they're really doing something when really they're doing almost nothing. And
right. It's just making you angrier and stupid. I've stopped tweeting other than kind of the occasional here's my article, because I just realized I'm like I don't want to fight with people about whether somebody should have been shot. I don't know. First of all,
okay, that is a very wise move and commendable move. Yeah, if you are a participant in Twitter and then can get off of it.
I'm trying. I'm only a few weeks into it, but like
no, I actually noticed that you're not on as much as used to be, and I actually, I've done episodes where I've talked about how awful I think Twitter is, but how I still have like a addiction or quasi addiction to it. But a couple days ago, I deleted from my phone for about 18 hours and was just walking around blissful and looking at birds, actually tweeting and so forth. But then of course I reinstalled it at some point to jump back into the
over and over. It seems to me that like if I'm like with a bunch of people who I love, and I'm like thinking about Twitter, like I've just misarranged my priorities in some horrible way, and like
right.
I've known addicts to actual drugs, and like that's how they have the conversation that we are having right now, and we should like recognize that and stop joking. Twitter people are always joking. They're like, oh, it's like an addiction, and then they're like, but no.
There's definitely. I did an episode of Phoebe Maltz-Bovey a couple months ago talking about the addictive aspects of it, and it definitely is objectively bad for me personally and in most senses and the world at large. But over the past year, like many people couldn't be with their loved ones. Like people were stuck inside, and so it was the only connection. The screen was the only connection to the real world for a lot of people.
it's a dangerous thought, but like I wonder if we would have done lockdowns if the internet were 10 years younger, or like if Zoom connections weren't kind of reliable, and if
it definitely would have played out differently. Yeah, people have talked about if this had happened in 2000,
yeah, like which is, it's not like it's so long ago. There's been like fundamental changes to technology. There's just like a couple more things, or they work a little better, and like the computer games are better. But the original report that recommends social distancing, that is like the one that we went off. Not that like people hadn't thought of stay away from people during the plague and like go, but the one that was like created under the Bush administration to it was actually a result of the like bioterror fears after the
anthrax.
Yes, the anthrax scare. It stipulated that they didn't think they could get the citizenry to social distance for more than like 3 weeks. So, that they were wrong, but it's interesting that was, I think, 2005, and
Yeah, I mean, so 2005 is when YouTube started, and I don't know when Skype was created, which is what we're using to record this conversation right now. It was probably a little bit before that, but and Amazon and food delivery apps, like all these things made it tolerable for a bulk of the population to mostly stay inside.
Speaking of like class analysis, by the way, like the different classes have experienced this pandemic so fundamentally differently.
Oh,
like,
for sure, yeah.
I know people who were like, I just simply didn't leave my house for 7 months, and then I know people who were like, yeah, well, I mean, I interacted with 300 people last week because I work at the checkout line of the grocery store, and that's how many people came to it, and I touched their stuff. And of course, they learned right away when like the fomites theory of transmission changed, because they were touching stuff every day. And then I know other people who are still like Purelling their mail, and I'm like, no, that's not the like I'm not going to tell you how to act, but just so you know that is not in fact the science. So and the difference between those things is again, that's class. It's just a class thing.
Yeah, and the one of the most dangerous professions you could have during the pandemic was working in a restaurant kitchen, and those are depending on the restaurant, different types of people working there, but often immigrants or people who are not here legally, or people working minimum wage. And
I'd like to look that up, because I don't know that to be untrue. I just I remember, not early on, but maybe halfway between the shutdown of the NBA and now. It's funny that we have the same marker of the beginning, that because other people kind of all have their own, that some of the jobs that people expected would correlate most highly with becoming infected with COVID didn't correlate with it. For example, people who work on airplanes, or people who were actually grocery checkout employees, or beat cops, or like a few, like there were just a bunch of things that everyone was like, well, obviously,
right. I think it wasn't fully understood how it was the virus was so airborne, and another people who work in a slaughterhouse, that's another one where it's a confined space. People are yelling because it's so loud, and so when they're yelling, they're expelling the virus. And whereas cops, if they're just in a car or walking around outside, then they're a lot more protected. But yeah, and so the people who have those jobs in slaughterhouses and in the back of a kitchen are, these are, well, I don't know. I don't know if they're on Twitter.
Yeah, that's right. I'm doing I'm looking into right now a case of in New York. This is where I'm like, I was right all along that wokeness was reactionary. I could have told you, why didn't you people listen to me? Please listen to me. I'm screaming insanely at the wall. Like, I'm looking into a case where the New York Police Department, one of its unions, is suing. You seem to have frozen. You can hear me.
Oh wait, yeah, you're frozen on my end too now.
Yeah, you're.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
There you are.
Okay, I just heard you. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you again now.
Okay, yeah, it froze for a second. We'll just cut that part out. Okay, why don't you start over with what you're investigating right now?
Okay, investigating this thing where basically there was a protest. It was a protest in support of a number of, let's say, social justice related causes, including the rise in AAPI violence, which is a ridiculous term for Asian people, where a black protester yelled a bunch of stuff, some of it quite nasty, at a police officer, detective who's Chinese American, and the police, one of the police unions, is now suing the protester in civil court. So they are arguing that the speech was hate speech and that it was assaultive speech.
Okay.
So he verbally assaulted this poor cop. And so I just feel like taking a bit of a victory lap for having been warning for a bunch of years that if you say things like this puts, New York Times staff in danger or whatever it is, you will not like what happens when other people pick up this weapon you created. Cops are now trying to establish the ability to sue and recover damages, or at least make you pay for a lawyer if you yell stuff they don't like at them. I think you should be able to. I don't like what this guy yelled at the cop, but I think you should be able to yell stuff at cops. I think you should be able to go to a protest and yell stuff. I don't really care what the stuff is. I think that everyone has that right. I think they should be able to do it, whether the cause that they are yelling in favor of is one that I like or one that I don't like. I kind of don't care. I don't think cops should be suing people for words and speech acts, and I'm really freaked out by this. So, but the way that the police union is framing their justification for bringing this case and the way that they're going to make their case to potential jurors in a civil suit is very, I guess, woke is the way to say it. And they're saying, this speech was assaultive, particularly in the climate. An AAPI person who's in the workplace shouldn't have to be subjected to this kind of verbal violence. And it's to me, come in a grimly predictable full circle to, okay, well, you've generated these concepts. The concepts are sort of double standardized so that some people use them and other people don't. Well, don't be surprised when the cops are using them to shut down black protesters or you or anyone.
Okay, yeah. So we've been having some tech problems, and some stuff may have been lost. But so Nick, thank you for coming on and having this lively discussion. I hope our viewers and listeners enjoyed it. If people want to see more of your work, where should they look?
They can look in. I have a weekly column that is called The Word of the Week. It's in the Washington Examiner magazine. They can find. I will tweet anything that I write, but right now I'm mostly just working on the book stuff. So, but you can find me at Nick Clairmont 1. I just published something about free speech in Aryeh magazine, which is doing good and interesting stuff. Anything I do should be in the Twitter feed.
Okay, cool. But you're wisely staying away from Twitter fights and doing.
Yeah, let's hope that is still accurate by the time anyone hears this.
Right. So I have not managed to mindfully disengage from the Twitter world. People can follow me on there, REACW. Okay, so thanks for coming on, Nick. Thanks to all of our viewers and listeners, and we'll see you again next time.